Jeevan sir graduated from our college in 2008, and he has experience handling a lot of litigation and arbitration matters, including interactions with clients, licensing with clients, and undertaking legal researches. He has he's argued at various matters before the Supreme Court, Delhi High Court, NGT, DRT, and arbitration tribunals. Welcome you here. Currently, he's serving as the Ketan partner in Delhi office. Thank you, sir. We welcome you here, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here, and thank you for the introduction. So just to briefly summarize, I have been with the firm for close to 12 years now. I passed out, as you mentioned, I passed out in the year 2008. That is the first batch of the college. Then immediately after passing out, I joined the Calcutta office of the firm because I had a pre-placement offer from there when I was interning in 2006. So 2008, I joined immediately after passing out. I joined the firm in the Calcutta office under Mr. Ram Niranjan Jhunjhunwala. He was one of the senior most partners of the firm, and I was reporting directly to him. Worked there for 7 years up to 2015, and was in the dispute resolution practice. In addition to general litigation practice, I did fair bit of in intellectual property practice as also employment practice. Thereafter, I decided to move on, and obviously Delhi has to be the place when it comes to litigation. So because there were certain limitations, particularly when we talk about Calcutta as a place for doing business development and the exposure to a celebrity litigation, if I may call it. So therefore, I voluntarily chose to shift to Delhi, and the firm was very supportive of that decision. And then I moved to the Delhi office as a principal associate, Delhi office. And in 2018, I got promoted as a partner of the firm. And I specialize in arbitration, commercial litigation, and I'm also part of the firm's employment, labor, and benefits practice group for the Delhi office. So that is broadly what I've been doing over the years. Yes, I enjoy arbitrations a lot, and particularly after the 2015 amendment. So I'll just touch upon broadly the queries which have been emailed to me. But like in the process, I'll also answer some of the specific queries. Having said that, yes, so commercial litigation, and having started off with the Calcutta office, that was in fact a blessing in disguise, because I had exposure to like the smallest of matters, like say a mutual divorce petition, to that of a admiralty suit, to that of a consumer matter, to a Supreme Court litigation. So it gave me wide exposure, and I was lucky enough to have a senior. Like you would have read many places that people say it's important to have a good boss than a good employer. So I strongly believe in that. So the partner under whom I was working was very supportive, and yes, yeah, he encouraged. He was quite encouraging in terms of, yeah.
Harshita, could you please mute?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
So,
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So he was quite supportive, and that, I think, according to me, plays a very important role, whether it is a law firm, whether it is any form of anywhere a person starts a person's career. It's very important that like the person under whom you are working, whether it is the senior, chamber senior, or for that matter, a law firm senior, the person has to be. Yeah, sorry. So the person has to be very supportive, and yes, my senior was quite supportive. And unlike a typical tier 1 practice, where you don't get enough opportunities to appear and argue matters on your own, so he was quite supportive, and he encouraged me, and without any inhibitions or without any fear of losing out on the client if the matter goes wrong. So that was a major plus point so far as starting my career under Mr. Jhunjhunwala is concerned. So yes, that played a great role. And Calcutta, with the limitations, the stakes of the matters were not as high as compared to that you see it in Delhi or Bombay. So whether it be the lower court practice or a tribunal practice or the high court practice. So we've got exposure to a wide variety of matters. So I appeared and argued matters as an associate of the firm, and that has and dealing with the administrative part of the firm also, which plays a very important role, starting from billing, realization, which are primarily the focus areas of a partner. But as an associate, he vested those responsibilities with me. So that was quite critical, and like that was quite critical in overall growth. So post that, obviously, it was a big decision for me because 7 years, it's a long time. And particularly from a litigation standpoint, once you are used to a particular kind of practice, the court practices, you're familiar with the language, you're familiar with the court clerks, the filing procedure. So all these plays a very significant role when we talk about a dispute resolution practice. So in spite of all that, I thought that in the long term, if I consider my personal growth overall, so it was important for me to move on and not be confined to the comfort zone which I had built over the 7 years period. And that's why it was a challenging decision, but it was seamless so far as the practice and procedures in Delhi is concerned. It's comparatively much simpler, I would say, as compared to Calcutta. So Calcutta, it's very cumbersome, whether it is the filing procedures or for that matter, the pace at which things move there. No offense to the place or the courts there, but at the same time, things are slow. And whether it is the high court or the lower court, it doesn't move at that pace, the pace at which things move here in Delhi, even if we compare the high court or for that matter, the lower courts. So yes, so that was always easier for me when I moved to Delhi. And in a law firm setup, yes, the firm expects you to pick up some form of a specialization. And there are different theories, some significant, important, what you call aspects, which if I may call it, they consider that specialization is not something which one should aim at, but at the same time, one should be a generalistic litigation practitioner. On the other side, there is a theory that people say one has to be sure of what one is good at and should limit the practice to that rather than being a jack of all trades and master of none. So therefore, having said that, I personally feel that it's always good to start as a general litigation practitioner rather than focusing on specialized area right from the beginning. At least the 5 years, initial 5 years are very critical, and one should do anything and everything that is practically possible in terms of a litigation which comes your way, whether it is a tax litigation, whether it is a consumer litigation, or even a divorce suit for that matter. So one should not limit one's exposure in terms of the various kinds of matters. And thereafter, it's much easier to move to a specialization. So even from my perspective, I did general litigation, and I continue to focus more on contractual disputes and commercial litigation. But having said that, I do not, it's not that I have not done a IP litigation or for that matter, a NCLT proceedings. Although my predominant practice area is arbitration, commercial litigation, employment, as I said at the beginning. But having said that, having done an IP litigation or a divorce litigation, it always gives you that added advantage. So whenever you are discussing with a client and an incidental question comes up, so it always gives you the edge rather than having a specialized area of practice and you not having any exposure whatsoever, and you would not be able to comment on what's happening in that particular field like contemporaneously. So that's what my viewpoint is. So it's always good to be a general practitioner. Then gradually, once you have a particular level of experience and exposure, then you may always choose a level of specialization. But unfortunately, many law firms these days are insisting on like specialization right from day one. So a particular associate is put in a real estate team, for example, or for that matter, a indirect tax team. Whereas in course of the entire 5 years, the person may not have keen interest. Maybe one or two internship is one thing, but not keen interest on that particular area of law. But obviously the associate also would not like to lose out on that opportunity of being associated with a tier 1 law firm, or for that matter any law firm, and lose out on the job opportunity, and therefore may reluctantly or hesitantly say yes to it and still go ahead with joining that particular team. But by heart of heart, the person may not be keen, or the heart will not be there ever for practicing that particular area of law. So that leads to like high attrition rates. As we know, the people, the person, the moment he or she gets an opportunity to move out, the person moves to another firm or another practice, and even try for shifting practice areas within the firm. If the firm is encouraging of that, then yes, that's possible. But more often than not, it is not encouraged. That has been my experience. And yes, because they don't want to invest in a particular associate by training that particular associate in a particular field of law, and then one fine morning, just because the associate wants to jump practice areas, they would allow the person to shift to the another practice area. But some of the firms, they do allow. In fact, at least in our firm, in one of my team members, he was originally in the corporate practice group, but decided voluntarily to move to my team, and that was very well accepted by the firm, and it was allowed without any hesitation. But these are all exceptions, but the general rule has been that it is not generally encouraged, and that leads to attrition and the person leaving the firm, or even completely the area of practice. Suddenly you will find a corporate lawyer shifting to a chamber practice under a senior advocate, joining litigation and all that, because the person feels that I'm not enjoying that particular practice area which I was compelled to or made to join. So even if, so initially it may sound fancy that yes, I have got a pre-placement offer or a campus offer or a what you call a offer from a tier 1 firm or a big law firm, tier 2 or a tier 3 firm, and I'm joining such and such as an associate. But like experiencing it is quite different. So it's not always the money, the job satisfaction, and the personal satisfaction where you actually enjoy doing things. It comes naturally to you. So just because there is a, like, just for example, I'll just give you an example. Somebody like we see typically in our law school, predominantly just because the majority of the class is choosing corporate law as a what you call an honors paper. You see there is a herd mentality which is going on, and everybody invariably they choose corporate law as their specialization or the honors paper, without thinking much that whether the person actually enjoys or likes to explore the area of corporate law or not. So similarly, just for example, I had taken in HNLU, I had taken environment law and intellectual property rights. I had thought that there is a lot of potential in that, and there were hardly 3 or 4 people who from the entire batch who had actually chosen these practice areas. But having said that, I always felt that corporate law is something which I did not enjoy, and maybe intellectual property, or for that matter environment law, there is a lot of potential. Although I have done both environment and intellectual property in bits and pieces, but having practiced intellectual property for and also doing prosecution as also litigation for good about 1.5 to 2 years, I felt that that is not something which I am enjoying, and therefore I continued with what you call general litigation practice. So that is something one has to be very conscious of, because it is you who has to finally decide as to what you are good at, what you are enjoying, to read or to explore or to research on, and where you see yourself after 5 years to be exploring that particular area of practice. So instead of choosing having a herd mentality, it is always better to choose what you like, even if that is something which is an exception to the general rule. So having said that, I'll just go to the broad questions which have been put forth to me. One is about what's your opinion on the recently introduced Schedule 8 in the Arbitration and Conciliation Act and criticisms it has received? So to answer this question, yes, so far as I would like to give a broad overview that the endeavor of the legislature and the courts in India particularly has been that we are shifting from a judicially dependent or a court dependent practice to an alternative dispute resolution practice. So there has been a significant change if we compare the 1940 Arbitration Act to the 1996 Act. We have come a long way in terms of reduced judicial interference. Having said that, the 2015 amendment is again a step further towards this objective and reduced judicial interference. And the 2019 amendment is again is further step, and each of these amendments, or for that matter since 1996 Act, has been to promote reduced judicial interference and also to encourage alternate dispute resolution as a mode of dispute resolution as compared to judicial intervention, or for that matter courts dispute resolution through litigation. But yes, there is a lot of scope of improvement. But having said that, the intentions are good. And particularly in my personal experience, I have seen 2015 amendment has made a significant change, particularly by introducing the timelines with respect to completion of the arbitration process. 12 months is the statutory timeline, which can be further extended by mutual consent by a further period of 6 months. And if the arbitration still doesn't get over, one has to go to the court under the appropriate provisions of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act for by giving adequate reasons why it could not be concluded, and the mandate of the arbitrators are extended by interference of the court. So having said that, in my personal experience, it has significantly increased the efficiency of arbitral tribunals, because the arbitrators are also quite serious about disposing of matters on a timely basis. And in one of my matters where I was the claimant and there was not much scope for oral evidence, we concluded the arbitration right from the date of invocation till the date of award within a period of 5 months, which was unheard of, particularly when we are talking about arbitration as a process of dispute resolution. So prior to 2015, I had some very strange experiences in my practice. Just for example, there were arbitrators, retired Supreme Court judges. I'll obviously not name them, but I used to get calls as the solicitor of a particular party who was responsible for arranging the venue, or for that matter, all the logistics. So the Supreme Court judges, retired judges who were the arbitrators in the arbitral tribunal, would even go to the extent of making a phone call and dictating the menu which they would want to have in the high tea and the particular venue where the arbitration should be held, because they liked a particular such and such a baked Alaska as a dessert, or for that matter a chicken patty as a snack. So they would insist on that, and not only that, rather they would insist on what you call having as adequate stock for them to pack it and take it back home. So that was the level of treatment which was meted out in terms of arbitration as a practice. And it was obviously a part-time so far as lawyers were concerned, and they insisted on having hearings post-court hours so that it does not affect their court commitments. And often we used to have arbitration hearings either in the evening hours, post-court hours, or say about 2 hours or so. And out of that, effective would be maybe 15 minutes or half an hour of hearing. And the rest would be discussing about the experience of the arbitrators, or discussing what's there in the menu, or like enjoying the food, what is there. So that was the kind of treatment which was meted out in terms of arbitration as a proceeding, and such careless approach was being given. So obviously, when you have a client sitting with you, they would also not be very serious about arbitration as a proceeding. And then post an arbitral award, which used to come up after years of sittings, and the client would know that it is going to go into cold storage, because the party aggrieved by the arbitral award will invariably challenge the award by filing a section 34, and it would just lie in cold storage after the notice has been issued, and the execution would automatically get stayed. And there are matters which I did in the Calcutta, when I was in the Calcutta office of the firm, and we obtained successful arbitral awards. The other party has simply filed a challenge to the arbitral award, and it is still pending. It is still pending at the section 34 stage before the High Court. So that's the kind of approach people had towards arbitration. But having said that, after the 2015 amendment, there has been a significant difference, both in terms of approach by the arbitrators as also by the clients, and also by the lawyers. Some of the arbitrators are insistent on.
पापा अचानक से ओल्ड लगने लग गए हेयर कट कराते बूढ़े
अन्ना 30 मिनट में तो यूं हो गया आपके पास सीधे बहुत ज्यादा छुट्टी वाली
Yeah, so yes, the approach has been, there is a lot of seriousness which has come in, and the people have been treating arbitration with a lot more seriousness, and also the clients also take it very seriously. The arbitrators are keen on the timelines which are issued right at the procedural hearing, and the endeavor is to complete it within in a time-bound manner. For example, we are having hearings, right? The dates are fixed well in advance, 6 days on a trot, and it's clarified. It's clarified that 3 days for the claimant, 3 days for the respondent and to respond, and 1 day for the rejoinder, and thereafter the matter is reserved for award. So that's followed quite seriously. I think somebody.
Hi, Prince, could you please mute your audio?
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah. So as I was saying, so there is a lot of seriousness which has gone in, and the approach, we have seen it also flowing in the court. Like section 34 matters are dismissed right on the first day of hearing. At least we have seen in few matters, which was unheard of prior to the 2015 amendment. So even otherwise, there is a lot of deterrent effect that has come in with the amendments to the section 34 provision, with mandatorily introducing an application for stay to be filed, and conditional deposit often as a condition which is introduced by the court. So that is a good deterrent for like somebody who has who intends to challenge an arbitral award. So, and that is being implemented quite seriously, both irrespective of whether the party is a private player or, for that matter, a PSU or the government entity. So that is a major difference that we see. And the 2019 amendment, particularly Schedule 8, that is moving a step forward in terms of institutionalizing arbitration. We see 95% of arbitrations in India are ad hoc arbitrations, as compared to Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, or London as a jurisdiction, where predominant or the same percentage, if not more, is institutional arbitration, and ad hoc is a minuscule percentage. It's just the opposite in India. The reason why I see is that people or the clients, they consider ad hoc arbitration to be providing much more flexibility and party autonomy, they would say. And it is invariably thought that somebody, if I'm nominating a particular arbitrator, that arbitrator is going to support me in course of the arbitration proceeding in one form or the other. So that is the mindset with which client proceeds. And therefore, they feel that there is a lot of flexibility which is available with ad hoc arbitration, and therefore the reluctance to go into institutional arbitration. Having said that, it is often it's often believed, and it is to some extent true as well, that institutional arbitration may at the outset may look quite expensive, because of the administrative charges.
सर आता है ना मेरा आता है इसलिए वो नीचे क्या कहते हैं सुनी नहीं
Yeah, so it's often perceived that institutional arbitration is quite expensive because of the administrative expenses and the procedure that they follow, and therefore it is there is a reluctance. Having said that, the efficiency with which they dispose of proceedings, that is something in the longer run I see that that saves a lot of money as compared to the number of hearings that an ad hoc arbitration insists or brings about as a consequence. So therefore, in the longer run, institutional arbitration is the way to go. And we are slowly but steadily moving towards it. But still, there is a long way to go. But these steps, like the 2019 amendment, particularly Schedule 8 is a step towards it. So the intent is good. But having said that, the intent is good, but at the same time, implementation possibly would be an issue. The implementation would be an issue because again, accreditation by the Arbitration Council of India, which has been proposed by way of the Schedule 8 and a limited number of like the criteria has been stipulated in Schedule 8. It is, I personally feel that there is a general reluctance to have people designated or classified as like of a particular designation or a classification or a qualification. So therefore, there is a general reluctance that we see in people being accredited by an agency, although we call it independent and all that. But having said that, there is a reluctance to go into that. So therefore, practically, I see there is a difficulty in implementation, and that is the reason we see there is it has not been notified as yet. Similarly, Arbitration Council of India again would be functioning under the aegis of the Supreme Court and the High Court at the different levels, depending on whether it is an international commercial arbitration or it is a domestic arbitration. But at the same time, there is still scope for courts interference in the event somebody is aggrieved by a decision of the Arbitration Council of India or the accredited agency. Then definitely it would again result in multiplicity of court proceeding right at the pre-reference stage. So therefore, I feel that while the intent is good with the Schedule 8, practical implementation may be difficult, and therefore it has invited a lot of criticism. So that's about the Schedule 8. The second question, if I may take it, how is a litigation practice different from practicing in a firm? So it's not very different, I would say, but having said that, law firm working as a disputes lawyer in a law firm, as I said at the outset, it has lot of pros as well as cons. In terms of the advantages, if I may say, then yes, it gives you a stability in terms of both financial stability. You don't have to do business development. There is a clientele which is already existent. And anyway, business development is the responsibility of somebody at the partner level. So somebody joining as an associate may not be responsible for business development. So that is a major advantage. So you just can focus on your working and execution rather than like bringing upon clients. Similarly, the variety of matters that a law firm brings about, that gives you exposure to a wide variety of matters. Those are the advantages, I would say. So consequently, you get a lot of exposure to variety of matters, which possibly if you start off with a chamber practice or an independent practice, to some extent there will be inhibitions and there will be limitations depending on the area of practice where your senior is practicing, or for that matter, the kind of matters you would be getting personally. So to some extent, it limits your exposure. Then obviously profile building is much easier in a law firm setup because you already have the brand in place. When you meet a client with your business card with the firm's name, it always gives you an advantage, and they are more receptive towards you as compared to somebody who is approaching as an individual. So those are broadly the advantages which I may point out. And in terms of the limitations or the drawbacks, so far as the law firm is concerned, yes, it entirely depends on the person under whom you are working. So, or the team under whom you are functioning. or the team with whom you are working. So depending on that, your exposure will essentially vary. So for somebody, he or she may have a great team to work with and with a wide variety of exposure. Having said that, in some teams, there have been experiences where it's a bureaucratic setup. The associate does not have easy access to the partner, or has to necessarily go through the senior associate or the principal associate to whom you directly report to. So those are disturbing, discouraging, and there is a lot of politics that you may be subjected to, again, depending on the team and the senior under whom you are working. There may be a scope for micromanagement, and you may be involved in very clerical things and not doing actual research, or for that matter, actual briefing a senior counsel or appearing in courts. Again, appearing in courts, more often than not, you may not be allowed to appear and argue matters on your own, considering the stakes involved, considering the clientele. There is a risk of losing on the clientele because of the stakes involved, and if anything goes wrong, so the firm would not like to take a chance with it. So limited independence, if I may call it. So to some extent, these will be the drawbacks of working in a law firm. So therefore, you have to pick and choose what you like. Yes, the financial stability, that is a major factor which we see when it comes to taking decisions in joining a law firm setup, whether it is a tier 1 firm, tier 2 firm, but it entirely depends on the team under whom you are working. It's not necessarily always the firm's brand name which works, because you are the firm is obviously at the larger level, but on a day-to-day basis you will be working with a team, so it's important that you have a good team to work with. So that is most important, and the major difference depending on what you like and what you don't like. One has to pick and choose. In terms of litigating in courts, it does not make too much of a difference, because again, you are not employees of the law firm, you are retainers. So you are essentially providing services to the firm, your legal services to the firm. So you continue to be an officer of the court like any individual practitioner, and you still owe your responsibility as an individual, as an independent lawyer would have. So vis-a-vis the court, vis-a-vis the client. Only advantage is that you have a brand name associated with you. So that's the only difference. Otherwise, it's more or less the same. And independence in terms of handling of the matter, that is obviously a major plus when it comes to individually handling litigation as compared to the firm. The firm is usually process driven, and there is a set process which you have to follow, whether in terms of approving drafts of pleadings, or for that matter, whether it is briefing a senior, there is a protocol which is to be followed. So these are things which one has to be conscious of working in a law firm is concerned. So whether you consider it as an inhibition or exposure, that is clear. Now, the third question, if I may take it, how far does it also apply to lawyers practicing with the dispute teams of the firms? So I think I've already answered this. The fourth, I would take it as, do you consider ADR better than judicial means? Have the number of parties opting for ADR significantly increased, and why? So yes, I personally feel that ADR promotes party autonomy, and there is a large number of matters which is possible to be adjudicated by way of ADR. It provides a lot of flexibility in terms of procedure, with the CPC and the evidence not being strictly binding, although the broad principles apply. But at the same time, it gives a lot of flexibility in terms of the arbitral tribunal to conduct the matter in its own way. So therefore, majority of the matters, particularly the commercial litigation matters, which is the major chunk of litigation and results in pendency of proceedings apart from the criminal matters, those can definitely be adjudicated upon through ADR mechanism, not only arbitration, but conciliation and mediation, those are also effective ways. Of course, the tendency in India has been that unless it is court instigated, there is not much seriousness. Even for arbitration, for that matter, it took years of the judiciary to intervene and make remarks and comments in various judgments for the arbitration jurisprudence to evolve. Similarly, like there have been recent remarks by Justice Bobde, Justice Sikri just before retiring, about promoting mediation and conciliation as effective modes of alternate dispute resolution as compared to litigation. So we have to take a cue from that, and it would take some time, but yes, yes, it's a definitely effective mode of dispute resolution. In our experience, at least I have seen the arbitration clauses are mostly preceded with other modes of dispute resolution, for example, negotiation, conciliation, and mediation. And those are mandatory or as condition precedent to invocation of arbitration. There are various judgments in those lines as well. So that is something which is construed in India as a empty formality. That's what I have seen. And there is a rush because there is nothing which is binding in nature. Although we have the conciliation, there is a separate chapter for conciliation. But in practice, I see that since the discussion and whatever transpires in a conciliation meeting, it is not binding. So there is lack of seriousness again. So therefore, it has to again flow from the judiciary. Like in the case of arbitration, there has to be series of judgments which have to come in, and the judiciary has to step up and promote these alternate dispute resolution mechanism and bring it at par, if not better than arbitration as a mode of dispute resolution. That way we can reduce the dependence on courts. So yes, the number of arbitration proceedings, as I said as a part of my talk, post the 2015 amendment, they have become more efficient and expeditious. So therefore, there is an increasing number of arbitrations, at least I have seen. Not as many mediation or conciliation, but yes, arbitrations, the number of matters have significantly increased, and the rate of disposal has also increased because of the statutory timelines which have been introduced. And again, the 2019 amendment aims at removing international commercial arbitration from the purview of the timelines. But that I personally disagree, that if arbitral institution like SIAC, LCC, LCIA, or the ICC, they can finish arbitration, even voluminous matters and matters involving multiple jurisdiction within a span of few months, there is no reason why we had to carve out an exception for international commercial arbitration so far as India is concerned. That is a step backward, I would say, in terms of arbitration friendly jurisdiction. That is the endeavor of the legislature and the overall legislative scenario or the judicial approach in promoting India as a arbitration friendly jurisdiction. So I would say that removing the timelines applicability to international commercial arbitration under the 2019 amendment is a step backward, I would say. Then the last question is, would you recommend a career in ADR, and could you elaborate on pros and cons of the same? Again, I have covered broadly as to what I meant, that I am a strong believer of starting with general litigation practice. ADR is nothing but original side practice. Like what you do in a civil suit, you do the same thing in an arbitration. It's not much different. So therefore, there is not much difference in so far as how you conduct an arbitration or how you conduct a suit, at least practically. So having said that, of course, the arbitration is aimed at being more efficient. But in terms of procedure, you also again have a, just for example, like in an arbitration, you have a statement of claim followed by a counter statement or a statement of defense, as you call it, which the respondent files. If the respondent has a counter claim, then statement of defense along with a counter claim. Similarly, the claimant will file a reply to the counter claim and rejoinder depending on the arbitral tribunal permitting it or not as a part of the procedure. Then there are suggested issues which is there in a civil suit. Here you have points for determination which are proposed by either parties, although you are not strictly governed by that. Some tribunals, they accept points for determination, some others they do not. Then you have evidence by way of affidavit, that is also there. Then you offer your witnesses for cross-examination depending on whether it requires an oral evidence or not, or maybe a documentary arbitration only, depending on whether it involves complex issues which needs leading of evidence, for example, liquidated damages, price variation clause, or for that matter, a force majeure clause, which is there where you need to adduce evidence to establish that you have a valid and sustainable claim. But it entirely depends on the claimant whether he or she wants to pursue a claim and lead evidence, oral evidence, or rely only upon a documentary evidence. Of course, documentary evidence is much more efficient. So having said that, after cross-examination, there is final oral arguments followed by written submissions, which the arbitral tribunal insists on for convenience. We also file a memorandum of costs because the section 31A of the Arbitration and Conciliation Act, read with 38, empowers the arbitral tribunal to award costs. So, which is usually awarded in favor of the successful party in an arbitration, unless barred by the arbitration agreement itself or the contract between the parties. So that is broadly the different stages of an arbitration proceedings. So the same applies for a civil suit. Only thing is that civil suit, the hearing dates comes up much later, whereas here the arbitral tribunal is sitting just for your matter to hear and dispose of your matter. So that's the efficiency which comes up. Otherwise, it's more or less procedurally it is similar. If you have had good exposure to the original side practice of any high court having original side jurisdiction or the lower court practice, then the arbitration practice would be not much different. And one has to be strong with CPC and predominantly contract law. So that's how I would look at so far as ADR as a career option is concerned. But I would still suggest that it is better to have exposure to lower court practice or original side practice in the high courts where like Delhi, Bombay, Calcutta, and Madras. So the chartered high courts. So one has to go through those experiences and exposure. It is always important. And then doing an arbitration, it's much more simpler and it makes more sense. And it's more it makes more sense, I would say. So it's always advisable to do litigation followed by arbitration rather than starting a career with ADR. That's how I would like to put it. And one more advantage which I have seen with arbitration in practice is that the arbitral tribunals, which mostly comprises of retired judges, depending on the kind of matter, many times it also has non-judicial tribunal members, like railway tribunals, or for that matter, you have technical people, depending on the nature and the sector of the arbitration. So that is also another experience when you are convincing people of who are, when you have to step down to their level and explain to them legal principles like liquidated damages. I had the opportunity of arguing before railway tribunals, like retired PWD engineers and retired railway officials or IRSE engineers, wherein I explained various complex issues of liquidated damages. So, so it was quite an interesting and like memorable experience, I would say, because you have to be all the more thorough with your preparation, because you have to be putting across your thoughts and the legal principles, as also the judicial pronouncement with much more simplicity, which is much more difficult. If you are arguing before a judge, if you are using legal jargon or legalese, like if I'm saying res judicata, or for that matter, the obiter of the judgment, or such and such majority held this or that, or a common judgment which is which a judge would easily know. I don't have to explain to the judge that it's a judgment which has been passed by Delhi High Court, two-judge division bench judgment, and then it has been followed by the Supreme Court. I don't have to explain those basics to a judicial member. Whereas if it is a technical member, I have to be much more simpler and much more precise and concise when I am presenting it. Otherwise, they may be lost in the arguments and they may not follow, and they may ultimately if I'm unable to effectively communicate my arguments and in support of my client's case, I may not get a favorable award. So that is much more difficult as compared to arguing before a judicial tribunal. So that is one aspect. Secondly, the most important thing I would say is that it gives you a flexibility to argue and address your matters. It's just like a more serious form of moot court. So it's like a informal setup. Having said that, the level of preparation you would need for an arbitration is much more, because you would be having a sole arbitrator or a 3-member arbitral tribunal sitting just for hearing your matter. Whereas if it is in a court of law, and if it is somewhere midway and it is a procedural hearing stage, not a final argument stage, you can possibly get away by not getting so much into the depth of the matter, because you know that it is likely to not be taken up for final arguments and may be adjourned because the judge has 50 other matters on the board, whereas it is not the case with the arbitration. So you have to be better prepared with an arbitration, because you will have to argue and keep their attention span for 6 hours or 7 hours at a stretch with a 1 hour break for lunch. So it's much more difficult. You will have to be much more well prepared. You have to talk sense and substance. But having said that, it gives you a lot of opportunities. So in a litigation setup, jury metrics plays a very important role. That's why we have a senior counsel leading you in a matter where stakes are high. But in an arbitration, predominantly from my experience of advising some foreign clients, I would say, they are more comfortable, particularly the European clients. I have seen as a matter of course that they are more comfortable in you arguing and addressing the arguments on their behalf, rather than you briefing a senior counsel, and the senior counsel with limited attention span in the conference is leading them in the arbitration proceedings, and you prompting or passing on chits, which is practically possible or happens more in a court of law. But the European clients or the foreign clients, they are more comfortable in you, because they are comfortable in you addressing and explaining their case in a much more better manner, because you have devoted that much more time in their facts and going into the depth of the matter. So that is quite encouraging. And usually I have seen that the arbitral tribunal, even if they are retired judges, whether it is judicial or non-judicial, they are more receptive, irrespective of whether you are a junior lawyer or a senior advocate. They usually don't make a distinction. But such distinction in some courts, at least, you find that a senior advocate is getting more attention or more indulgence in terms of a litigation before a court, but a junior member is like maybe bullied, or for that matter, either by the senior or by the judge. Some judges, there are exceptions of course, and some judges are very encouraging, and rather they would make the senior who is leading you and was stuck up in some other court, when he enters the courtroom, makes the senior sit beside you and continue hearing you, which is quite encouraging. But having said that, there are instances where if the other side is being represented by a senior advocate and you are arguing your own matter, there is some form of less indulgence that you get, which is not the case with arbitration if you are well prepared. So that is a major advantage if you want to, and if you enjoy arguing matters. It's all about how better prepared you are. So that's what is the differentiating feature, and which for me was one of the predominant reasons why I focused on arbitration as an area of specialization. So that's all from so far as I am concerned. Please feel free to ask me any further or more questions if you have.
So there's one more question. So
Yes.
if you want, I'll read it to you.
It's in the chat box, right?
Yes, it is from Varshini. Yes.
Yeah. See, this is like, for example, this is very factual in terms of like how the firms treat a request for within the teams shifting. So it essentially depends on various factors, like, for example, the partner under whom in the corporate practice. I'll just give you a hypothetical example. Like if person X is working with partner A in the corporate team, and there is a partner B in the litigation team, and the person X approaches A that is the corporate partner, and says that I want to do litigation, it entirely depends upon whether A is supportive of that fact or takes it as an offense, that I have trained you for say 6 months or so, and now one fine morning you are coming up to me and saying that I want to shift to litigation. So some people may react badly about it, and the person may it may backfire to the person. And in some cases, the partner A may just walk up to somebody like a partner B with whom he or she has a friendly rapport and say that, see, I understand that you in your litigation team have a requirement, and I have a great team member who was doing and assisting me in corporate transactions, but I can vouch for him or her that he or she would be an asset to your team, because conceptually and fundamentally the person is very good at, and would be an asset to your team. So that's how it entirely depends on that. So how the partners react to it and how the HR team, so HR team would essentially go by the reaction how the partners take it. So the decision of the associate would essentially be on the basis of how the partners treat it. So it is quite factual and it varies significantly. That's the reason why the difference is there as well. It's completely up to the mindset of the partners who are involved. Like in my case, the partner was very receptive so far as the person whom I was referring to, who is now in my team. So the partner in the corporate team was, he's quite a senior partner. He just called me up and said, say, he such and such wants to join your team, and you were looking out for somebody, I understand, from the HR, and would you be interested? And coincidentally, the person, the associate who was in the corporate team had interned under me in the Calcutta office when I was in Calcutta. So that helped. So I knew the person beforehand, and even informally, I used to have a informal rapport with the associate otherwise also. So that helped. So I knew the person from internship days, and also as an associate in the corporate team, I knew him. So therefore it made it much more easier. So I was more than happy to take him, because I knew that he was good, contractual principles were very good. And I used to discuss matters which were of common interest.
So we don't have any more questions as of now.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me. Then it was a pleasure interacting with you.
No, so the pleasure was all ours. Thank you so much for taking out time today and addressing us.
No problem. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
I hope I could make sense and it was useful.
Yes, sir. It was very informative. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Thank you, sir. Bye, sir.